signify by saying aye. Opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
On that, I request a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote. 5-minute vote.
With the 2013 fiscal year set to start October 1st, this is a temporary 6-month spending bill funding the government through the end of March 2013. Congressional quarterly reporting on this bill says that the CR will leave most federal agencies effectively operating in a kind of limbo for the next 6 months, running on appropriations laws decided in 2011 and being unable to make any major changes in their budget or operations. Final passage vote, it's 5 minutes.
The yeas are 329 and the nays are 91. The joint resolution is passed. The joint resolution is passed without objection. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, to suspend the rules and pass S. 3245, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. And the clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 3245, an act to extend by 3 years the authorization of the EB-5 Regional Center Program, the E-Verified Program, the Special Immigrant Non-Minister Religious Work Program, and the Conrad State 30J1 Visa Waiver Program.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bills? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote. A 5-minute vote.
Just moments ago, the House passing the short-term 6-month spending bill, the continuing resolution funding the government from the beginning of October, beginning of the fiscal year, through the end of March 2013. A couple of reporters tweeting that Paul Ryan voted yes. Daniel Newhouser saying that he did vote yes on the CR, though it spends more than his budget called for. If you want to follow Capitol Hill reporters, you can follow us, twitter.com/cspan, and look for the congressional reporters in the list there. So they passed the CR. They also passed a Republican bill that would require President Obama to offer an alternative to the sequesters across-the-board spending cuts. And earlier today, they passed a bill that was written in response to a Supreme Court ruling of this summer. The Stolen Valor Act was passed today. This is a bill that's in response to the court's overturning of the original bill. This is legislation making it a crime to lie about your military service or medals if it benefits you financially. So that bill passed earlier today in the House, and this should be it. This should be the last vote of the day in the House, and this is on a bill dealing with reauthorizing several immigration programs. We expect the House to gavel in tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock Eastern, and they will work on a bill that would prohibit the Energy Department from issuing loan guarantees for renewable energy projects submitted after 2011. And we will have, of course, live House coverage when they come back tomorrow.
Yeas are 412, the nays are 3. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Chair lays before the House this enrolled bill.
H.R. 6336, an act to direct the Joint Committee on the Library to accept a statue depicting Frederick Douglass from the District of Columbia and to provide for the permanent display of the statue in Emancipation Hall of the United States Capitol.
For what purposes the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Government Oversight and Reform be discharged from further consideration of House Resolution 775 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 775, resolution condemning the shooting that killed 6 innocent people at the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin in Oak Creek, Wisconsin on August 5, 2012.
Is there objection to the consideration of the resolution? Hearing none, without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Gotcha. We got one to that. At this time, entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purposes, gentleman from California rise? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to speak in favor of the resolution I co-authored with the Wisconsin delegation here in solidarity with the Sikh community in Oak Creek and the Sikh community all across the United States. In a strange coincidence, I had a previously scheduled meeting in California at a Sikh temple on the very day when that murderous attack in Oak Creek occurred. And obviously our discussion shifted to the subject of that premeditated attack. I was able to hear about the plight of being targeted because of one's religion, the plight of being targeted for one's appearance. We are in a constant struggle against bad ideas, despicable ideas. Passing this resolution will not ease the pain of those affected by this tragedy, but it does show to the world that people from across the United States can unite and denounce bigoted violence. Our great country is rooted in religious tolerance. The Constitution makes freedom of religion first and foremost. There is no place in this country for religious motivated terrorism, and this resolution that we passed reaffirms that. And I end by thanking Mr. Ryan and the Wisconsin delegation for their efforts on this resolution, but also I thank the leadership of both parties here today for working with us to make sure that this resolution came to the floor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana rise?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I'm really disappointed today. We passed a CR for 6 months, and it contained language in there that was supposedly designed to keep Libya and Egypt from getting funds. And my colleagues overwhelmingly voted for it. I do not criticize them for that, but I do feel very strongly in my heart that we made a mistake by not in the Rules Committee passing an amendment which would make sure that the money in that bill for foreign assistance did not go to Libya or Egypt. I read what the document that they put out, and it does not prohibit the money from getting to Libya and Egypt. And the Muslim Brotherhood runs Egypt. They hate the United States. And the president has said he wanted to model his country after Iran. In Libya, they killed our ambassador and scaled the walls. They burned our flag. They did it in Egypt, and they held up the al-Qaeda flag. And we're going to give them money. It makes no sense. And if the American people were paying attention to this right now, they would raise hell. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Monday, prominent Cuban dissident Marta Beatriz Roque launched a hunger strike in order to draw attention to the unwavering attempts by the Castro dictatorship to suppress pro-democracy supporters. She has since been joined in her hunger strike by an additional 25 dissidents. Roque suffers from diabetes, and her water-only fast could easily kill her in days. Castro's thugs have continually increased the level of repression against the opposition movement. It is intolerable that this has become the norm in Cuban society. Jailing, beating, and detaining peaceful protesters who are simply demanding their basic human rights is not the norm. It is unacceptable. The Castro brothers will continue their violent and abusive ways and will stop at nothing to remain in power. How bad do things need to get before the international community finally recognizes the plight of the Cuban people? These brave men and women continue to risk their lives every day, and we must call attention to their struggle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. Any further requests for 1-minute speeches? Hearing none, under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from California, Mr. Dreyer, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader. The gentleman from California is recognized for 60 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
No objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about an issue that both Democrats and Republicans and virtually every American is talking about, and people all over the world are talking about. What is that issue? How do we increase global economic growth? And here in this country, how do we create more good American jobs? It's obviously a key part of the presidential campaign. We have Democrats and Republicans daily stand in the well of the House of Representatives and offer proposals, talk about their ideas as to how we can create good jobs. We have the sad report of 380,000 people who fell off the rolls even looking for jobs. We have literally millions of our fellow Americans who are looking for jobs, and we have many businesses that are struggling. One of the great challenges that President Obama put forward was the goal of doubling our exports. And we all know that he very much wanted to do that. We, as members of Congress, came together after a decade, and we finally were able to successfully pass market-opening opportunities for U.S. workers to sell their goods and provide our services in Panama, Colombia, and South Korea. It took us a long time to get there. I know that it's easy to point the finger of blame, but the fact is we've been ready for a long time. This institution was ready for a long time, Democrats and Republicans alike, and we were finally able to get the legislation up here from down on Pennsylvania Avenue, and we were able to make it happen with strong bipartisan votes on all three of those agreements. Well, Mr. Speaker, with recognition that opening up markets around the world for U.S. goods and services is a key way to create jobs here, because again, as we debated the Panama, Colombia, and Korea trade agreements, there were members on both sides of the aisle who stood up and argued in behalf of those agreements. We now have before us what I believe is an absolute no-brainer, but tragically it's created some political consternation over a lot of confusion. We know that the idea of seeing countries join the WTO, the World Trade Organization, creates a scenario whereby they have to comply with a rules-based trading system. And we know that once they enter the WTO, there are constraints imposed on them, along with the benefits that they get for their membership in the WTO. And there was a lot of negotiation, a lot of talk about Russia's entry into the World Trade Organization. The idea of seeing Russia forced to comply with a system that would prevent them from engaging in discriminatory practices, from engaging in the kinds of acts that prevent prevent products and services from getting into their country. The structure of having to comply with a rules-based system is something that membership in the WTO forces and creates. And again, there were a lot of negotiations. The last was dealing with a border dispute with Georgia that was resolved, and that was resolved several months ago, and that put into place a structure that allowed, on August 22nd, last month, for Russia to enter the World Trade Organization. Russia is part of the WTO. They are now, having been for over 3 weeks, a member of the World Trade Organization. That means, as I said, tremendous benefits that Russia gets. They have 140 million consumers, and there are going to be opportunities for countries around the world to export into Russia. We last year exported $11 billion of goods and services into the WTO. But guess what, Mr. Speaker? We're not at the table anymore. We've lost out on our chance to be able to sell our goods and services into Russia, that market of 140 million consumers. Now, why is it that we've lost out? Well, we haven't been able to have a vote here in the Congress on Russia's accession to the WTO. Why hasn't that happened? Well, I hate to be political, even though this is the time of year when people are especially political, but we need to get this sent up here to the Congress so that we can put together what I know is going to be very broad bipartisan support to make this happen. When it comes up, I know that we will see tremendous support on the Republican side of the aisle, and I say that because I'm particularly proud of the 73 newly elected Republican members of Congress. Of the 87, 73 sent a letter to President Obama saying that they believe it very important for us to open up that market so that if we all have this desire of creating more good jobs in the United States, let's open up that market to 140 million consumers. Well, unfortunately, we're still waiting for that, and I know that it's not just Republicans who are in support of this, Mr. Speaker. We have Democrats who are passionately and strongly in support of it. My very dear friend from New York, Mr. Meeks, he's going to join us. We've got other colleagues of ours who are going to join us in just a minute. But I want to say that this is something that absolutely should be done. Now, I talked about the fact that I believe it's a no-brainer, but I recognize that there is a lot of political consternation about this because it's Russia. And we all know that Russia has an absolutely horrendous human rights policy. We know that Russia has engaged in trying to expand its sphere to other former republics of the Soviet Union. We know that there is tremendous corruption and cronyism that exists in Russia today, and it is not acceptable. It is not acceptable to any of us. Now, there's some, Mr. Speaker, who argue that for us to deny the U.S. an opportunity to have a vote on PNTR, basically repealing Jackson-Vanik and allowing us to proceed with this would be a good thing, and it would send a message to Russia, when in fact the exact opposite is the case. There's nothing that we could do as the United States of America that would be a greater boost to supporting the perpetuation of the aberrant behavior that we have seen from Russia than for us to deny a vote on permanent normal trade relations that would see us then have access to that market. I said that last year we exported $11 billion of goods and services to Russia. If we could pass PNTR here, projections are that by 2017 we would double that from $11 billion to $22 billion. Now, what does that mean? It means more good U.S. jobs. And what does it mean? It means an expansion of our American values. It means, again, this forced compliance with a rules-based trading system. It means creating a structure that will allow us to undermine the kind of political repression that exists in Russia. Now, our sticking our head in the sand would be just plain wrong. Now, those are not just my words, Mr. Speaker. We, on the 12th of March, received a letter from 7 of the most prominent and outspoken human rights activists in Russia. And they, in a letter, an open letter that was sent to those of us who are considering this issue, said the following. Now, this is from these very, very prominent dissidents and activists, some of whom I'm sure have been imprisoned. They've had long histories of being opposition leaders to Vladimir Putin. So in the letter that they sent to us, Mr. Speaker, they said, some politicians in the United States argue that the removal of Russia from Jackson-Vanik would help no one but the current Russian undemocratic political regime. They go on to say that assumption is flat wrong. Although there are obvious problems with democracy and human rights in modern Russia, the persistence on the books of the Jackson-Vanik Amendment does not help to solve them at all. Moreover, it brings direct harm. It limits Russia's competitiveness in international markets for higher value-added products, leaving Russia trapped in its current petrostate model of development and preventing it from transforming into a modern, diversified, and more high-tech economy. This helps Mr. Putin and his cronies, they say in this letter. At the end of the day, those who defend the argument that Jackson-Vanik's provisions should still apply to Russia in order to punish Putin's anti-democratic regime only darken Russia's political future, hamper its economic development, and frustrate its democratic aspirations. And, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to include this letter from the 7 dissidents in the record in its entirety, underscoring how critically important it is for us to take this action so that we can boost those who are struggling to improve the plight of those Russians who are seeing their human rights jeopardized based on the current policies. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent that it be included in the record, if I might, Mr. Speaker.
No objection.
I also want to say that as we look at this question of job creation and economic growth, it's not something that, again, is at all partisan, and it's something that transcends this institution. We have received a number of letters, and let me see if I can dig this one up here. We have a bipartisan letter from governors across this country that was sent just weeks ago, on the 25th of July. It was sent to us by governors from Alabama, Arkansas, California, Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, Iowa, Michigan, Mississippi, North Dakota, South Carolina, South Dakota, Utah, Vermont, and Washington. A broad cross-section geographically and politically, Democrats and Republicans. And all of these governors were signatories to this letter in which they say, as governors, we know from firsthand experience in our states that expanding opportunities for international trade and attracting foreign investment are essential to promoting U.S. economic growth and creating new and better jobs right here in America. Russia's impending membership in the World Trade Organization offers a significant opportunity to increase our trade and investment with the world's 9th largest economy. And so I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, you can understand why I see this as a no-brainer. To me, this is a pretty simple thing, but I recognize that some might believe that it's a reward to Russia and to Vladimir Putin, and I stand with them. I stand with them for all the reasons that they're opposing it, but I argue that the reasons that they and I oppose the actions of Vladimir Putin underscore why we need to ensure that the U.S. is at the table. And so, with the President having stated that he has this goal of doubling U.S. exports, and we've got 140 million consumers there who very much want to have access to U.S. manufactured products, to our goods and services, we need to get it done. And why don't I begin, since I see a number of my colleagues here, by recognizing my very good friend from New York, Mr. Meeks, who has joined us. And as I recognize Mr. Meeks, I'd like to say that a number of members have come up to me from both sides of the aisle, Mr. Speaker, and indicated that they very much wanted to be able to be here this evening to talk about this. One of them is our friend from Virginia, Mr. Moran, and he handed me some talking points is his statement that at this juncture I would like to ask unanimous consent be included in the record as well. No objection. And with that, I'd like to yield time to my very, very good friend from New York, Mr. Meeks.
Suspend. The request is covered by general leave.
Ah, great. So it's going to be in there.
If the gentleman wishes to ask for it.
Well, then, Mr. Speaker, at this juncture, I would like to ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks for general leave to include any brilliant statements they might have in the record on this issue.
Hearing no objection.
And with that, I'd like to recognize my friend from New York, Mr. Meeks.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to thank my friend from California, Mr. Dreyer, and he's correct. This is a bipartisan bill that it makes common sense, just common sense, that we get this done. So, as I stand here today, I say to you, it is the right thing for America. It is the right thing for businesses in America, and it's the right thing for us to create jobs in America, passing PNTR for Russia. Mr. Dreyer said Russia is the 9th largest market in the world and wants the United States manufactured goods and services, and U.S. companies are eager to supply Russia's rapidly expanding consumer market. So why are we waiting to make this happen? While we wait, the failure of the United States Congress to grant permanent normal trade relations to Russia has compromised the competitiveness of the United States businesses, hindered the increase of export of goods and services, and stood in the way of growth for United States domestic jobs. On August 22nd, the Russian Federation joined the World Trade Organization, concluding nearly 20 years of negotiations and discussions with the United States and about 150 other WTO members. And during these years, wasn't easy, but Russia did complete numerous reforms of its businesses and trade practices and of its legal system to conform to the norms of the international community and to the WTO rules. These reforms will benefit, not hurt, benefit U.S. companies. It puts them in a rules-based system. Now, since August 22nd, Russia has significantly opened its markets to more than 150 WTO trading partners, with the sole exception, the United States of America. That means that since August 22nd, businesses from more than 150 WTO member countries, with again the sole exception of those from the United States, have conducted trade with Russian counterparts protected by the WTO dispute resolution mechanisms. And while we wait to act, U.S. businesses are at a competitive disadvantage. Business analysts say that the U.S. exporters currently underperform with respect to Russia. They predict that PNTR, U.S. trade with Russia could at minimally double over the next 5 years. Now, I'm from New York, and I just look at what it means for New York, just a small piece. New York, where exports to Russia nearly reached $500 million in 2001, $500 million, now that's a big deal. But when you consider the transportation, the shipping, the customs brokers, the airport personnel jobs involved, the potential economic impact is tremendous. Clearly, increased trade is good for New York, but it's also good for every state in the United States and stands to benefit every state, I repeat, stands to benefit from a new opportunity to sell more American goods and services to Russia through PNTR. So I say we've got to get it right. Let me just conclude by saying this. I also am the ranking Democrat on Europe. And as I go and talk to a number of the nations who used to be part of the USSR, some who still have some conflicts with Russia, one of the things that I want to talk to them, well, what do you think? A, are you happy that they're in the WTO? They all said yes. B, should we get rid of Jackson Vanik and make sure that we're able to trade? They all says yes, that it sends the right message, and it then compels Russia to play by some rules, and we then have a referee in which to make sure they do that. So I'm hopeful that we get this together, and before we leave here, we pass PNTR for Russia, because every single day that we don't, we're losing out on creating jobs here in America. So I yield back, Mr. Dreyer.
Well, I thank my friend.
I look forward to working with you, and hopefully we'll get this done.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my friend for his very thoughtful comments, and I would just like to underscore this notion of doubling our exports, taking that level from $11 billion in the next 5 years to $22 billion will inure to the benefit of New York, of California, of Minnesota, of Louisiana, and it will provide benefits all across this country. And at the same time, it will help us deal with this human rights question, which is such an important one, because I haven't talked about it, but obviously including the legislation that deals with the very tragic death of Sergei Magnitsky, who was a lawyer in Russia who was raising questions and basically a whistleblower of raising concerns about the behavior of the Russian government. He was left to die in prison, and we, with this legislation, will be ensuring that those who are responsible are brought to justice and that it never happens again. And so I think that all the way around, this can be a win-win for the cause of human rights and for the cause of creating jobs right here. And I thank my friend from New York for his thoughtful contribution. We're very pleased to be joined, Mr. Speaker, by my good friend from Minnesota, with whom I've been privileged to travel, and has a great understanding and grasp of the issue of globalization and how opening up new markets around the world will benefit his constituents. I'm happy to yield to my friend.
Well, I thank the Chairman for yielding, and let me just first say, with the bipartisan support of this important issue, which I will concur in comments from Mr. Meeks, but I want to thank Mr. Dreyer, the Chairman, because I think we're having these types of discussions on the floor today thanks to his many years of leadership to educate all of us in the House on a bipartisan basis about the benefits of trade, about selling American, and his leadership in establishing this Free Trade Caucus has been so valuable to me as a newer member, and I know that our country is in great gratitude, and we're going to miss your leadership down the road, Mr. Chairman, in the future. Let me just say that I also want to rise in strong support for passing this permanent normal trade relations status with Russia. We must pass this legislation to give American manufacturers, American farmers, and American service providers a fair chance to compete and then win and sell more of their goods in the markets of Russia. Russia joined the WTO already. They already joined the World Trade Organization back on August 22nd. They've already begun to open their markets to the rest of the world. So now there are about 150 countries, except the United States, that can fully benefit from much better access to the Russian marketplace. Additionally, all of these nations, except the United States, can benefit from Russia's WTO entrance commitments, including stronger international property protections, greater transparency, recourse in the WTO's dispute settlement procedures if Russia fails to meet its commitments. And until Congress approves PNTR, the United States cannot claim all of the benefits that come along with Russia's entrance into the WTO membership obligations. So the President's Export Council, we've already heard some great statistics tonight that are real. They're real, Mr. Speaker. They estimate that U.S. exports to Russia will double, they'll triple over the next 5 years if we pass PNTR, adding jobs here in the United States. These are jobs in manufacturing, these are service jobs, these are jobs in high tech, and all across the spectrum of other industries. And there's no doubt that Russia's demand for foreign services and goods is growing. This is a country with a population of 142 million people. It's got a rapidly growing middle class. Medtronic, I will speak in particular about a company from Minnesota, medical device manufacturer. It's based in Minnesota, my home state. It's one of the companies that will lose out if we don't pass permanent normal trade relations soon. And Russia, as I mentioned, is one of the fastest growing markets. It's also a fast growing market for medical devices and medical technology. It's a key player in the Russian medical device market. In fact, since 2005, there have been 10,000 Russian healthcare professionals that have been trained in Medtronic technologies. And in the last 5 years, these Medtronic technologies and therapies have benefited about 70,000 patients across Russia. So Russia has now agreed to substantial tariff reductions for imported medical devices. Russian tariffs on these products will average about 5%. It's going to give U.S. medical technology companies the opportunity to significantly expand into the Russian market. And meanwhile, Russia PNTR does not require any tariff reductions or market liberalization by the United States. But all this will go away, Mr. Speaker. All this will be at risk if we do not act in passing PNTR with Russia in the near future here. So, Mr. Speaker, I would just say that approval of Russia PNTR is a critical step towards ensuring that U.S. companies can benefit from Russia's WTO ascension and remain competitive in the markets today. And until we do that, all other WTO countries will continue to grab market share that is much more difficult to grab back in today's global competitive environment. And so when I think of a competitor and a company like a Medtronic that's based in Minnesota, we want to make sure that their workers and their ingenuity and their innovation is going to continue to grow and prosper, and we can sell American across the world. So in other words, Mr. Speaker, U.S. companies are being left behind as our competitors continue to grow in this very profitable market of medical devices, losing ground we may never be able to make up. So with other countries gaining this head start now in the Russian market, our time is running out. So this PNTR, it really benefits the United States, and I hope that we act next week, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, before we head back before the election season, because this is critical for jobs. It's bipartisan. The President can claim great ownership and credit for this as well if we act soon. And I will do all I can to continue to work with you, Mr. Chairman, to move this forward as well.
If I could reclaim my time, and I thank my friend for his very strong commitment to this. And I'd like to expand on this Medtronic example, if I could, for just a moment, because you know, we talk about big pictures, we talk about numbers, we say, yes, we want to create jobs, but the example of Medtronic is very clearly a specific opportunity. And I wonder if my friend has any examples, if he's talked to executives at Medtronic about the benefits of opening up that market in Russia, because it's true. I mean, you know, we are horrified at the crony capitalism that exists in Russia. We're horrified at the human rights violations that exist, but there are also many very, very good, dedicated, hardworking Russian people who would like to have an opportunity to have access to many of the products that are made right here in the United States. I know my friend and I have traveled around the globe, and one of the things that consistently comes forward is people saying, we want to be able to purchase goods from the United States of America, goods manufactured in the United States of America. And I wondered if my friend might tell us a little about the success of Medtronic and what has happened and exactly what benefit we would see created for jobs here and also for the consumers in Russia. I'm happy to yield to my friend further.
And thank you for yielding back. I would just say that whether it's a company like a Medtronic or an agricultural-based company like a Cargill, which is based in my district in Minnesota as well, clearly there's the opportunity to sell American, knowing that 95% of the world's consumers are outside of the United States, and this opportunity in Russia with huge market share is going to mean more medical devices being sold in Russia. These are life-improving, these are life-saving technologies that there is no doubt in a competitive environment European companies are trying to access that market, are moving forward to do that, and a world-class leader like a Medtronic is going to be stepping into, is going to have a vacuum, and unless it's able to move forward, unless Congress acts to give permanent normal trade relations.
Well, reclaiming my time, my friend is absolutely right, and I just want to again express appreciation to his commitment to our trade working group, which has on a wide range of issues been able to focus on creating jobs for millions of Americans as we've sought to recognize the benefits of exports and imports as well when it comes to improving the standard of living and quality of life for our fellow Americans. And he's been very dedicated to his constituents, and I appreciate your participation this evening, too. I'm also very pleased to see that we're joined by my very good friend from Louisiana, another hardworking member of the House Ways and Means Committee, and someone who understands the world extraordinarily well, and I'd like to recognize my friend Mr. Bastani.
Well, thank you, Chairman Dreyer, and let me say thank you, first of all, for your tremendous service to our country in your capacity as a member of Congress, as Chairman of the Rules Committee. I want to thank you for your leadership on international trade and promoting America's role in international trade. I also want to thank you for your friendship and your wise counsel. I've enjoyed the time I've been able to travel with you.
We've still got months to go. We've still got months to go.
We still do, but I'll say this. I'll miss having you here, and I look forward to keeping in touch in the future.
Absolutely. We should do that.
Let me say thank you for bringing or organizing this round of speeches tonight to talk about this crucial piece of legislation that we need to pass. Because what it will do is it ensures a level playing field for U.S. workers, U.S. farmers, employers who are competing for business in Russia. Now, we all know that until Russia came into the WTO, it was a very difficult place to get access, market access for our businesses, especially certainly large companies, but small companies, mid-sized firms. And I believe it's vital for Congress to grant Russia permanent normalized trade relations by removing them from the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. If we don't do this, if we don't terminate that provision and grant PNTR, Russia will deny, or could certainly deny, U.S. exporters some of the market-opening concessions it's made to join the WTO, and the United States would not be able to challenge those actions in a rule-based system through the WTO's dispute mechanism, dispute settlement system. This is critically important, especially if we talk about small and mid-sized firms that are in manufacturing that want to export. They need that kind of rules-based system to work within. Otherwise, they don't have the recourse to fight protracted battles in a difficult market like Russia. Now, of course, it's with some trepidation that we undertake this, as we know that U.S.-Russian relationship, the relationship between our two countries is somewhat tenuous. We know very well about Russia's human rights abuses. We know about the poor respect for rule of law. We've heard extensive stories about the corruption. And yet, the reality is Russia has now become a full-fledged member of the World Trade Organization. And if we're not and to avoid putting the U.S. at a disadvantage, we need to move forward and grant permanent normalized trade relations. And I'll say this, the best thing we can do as a country from a foreign policy standpoint with our relationship with Russia is to move forward with normalizing trade relations with Russia. Because if you want to see political reforms in Russia, if you want to clean up the corruption, you want to see rule of law flourish in Russia, our commercial relationship with Russia is critical because it will help build a strong, vibrant middle class in Russia, which will help bring about political reforms there and help overall in the world of security. But at the same time, it's a win-win because this grants the United States businesses, farmers, access to a market which will help create good-paying, high-paying jobs here in the U.S. PNTR will also make permanent the trade status the United States has extended to Russia on an annual basis for more than a decade. So we're not doing anything new. We're permanently normalizing this, which essentially grants Russia the same access to the U.S. market that all of our other trading partners enjoy. This is nothing new or anything special for Russia. Rather, it's far more important for the United States, for our manufacturers, our service providers, our agricultural interests who are seeking access, open access into the Russian market. In an attempt to continue a level playing field for international trade, the WTO requires members to extend normal trade relations to all other WTO members on an unconditional basis, unless a country does not want to apply WTO rules to another country. After 18 years of negotiations, Russia officially became a member of the WTO on August 22nd of this year. Currently, the United States has a condition that's placed on Russia. It dates back to the 1970s. When the Soviet Union, I should say, had restrictive immigration policies preventing Jews from leaving its territory. Congress passed the Jackson-Vanik Amendment to the Trade Act of 1974. However, since 1992, the United States has certified annually that Russia complies with the Jackson-Vanik Amendment's provisions, and we have conferred normal trade relations on an annual basis to Russia. Only by graduating Russia from the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, making these normal trade relations permanent, will the U.S. be able to be in full compliance with its WTO obligations, enabling U.S. businesses and farmers to enjoy all the trade concessions and commitments that Russia has made in order to join the WTO.
Let me just reclaim my time there to underscore the very important point that my friend has made, Mr. Speaker. We all know that Jackson-Vanik was the intentions behind it were very good. We saw horrendous policies from the Soviet Union in a wide range of areas. Virtually everything they did was bad as the Soviet Union. Totalitarian country, but the denial of opportunities for Jews to emigrate, especially going back to Israel, is what led to that amendment to the 1974 agreement. But I'd like to ask my friend to repeat again. He said that we've had complete compliance, that we've been able to certify for now exactly 2 long decades.
That's
1992,
right.
20 years ago. 1992 to 2012. So for 20 years we've had annual certification because there has been an opportunity in Russia since, thank God, the Soviet Union came down with the work of so many people, but we saw it come down, and we now have seen really what you would call a Cold War era provision that has been left in place for 2 decades. Why in the world would we still have this? And it seems to me that it's the right thing for us to do to ensure that we sweep this aside so that we can move ahead with these market opening opportunities. And I assume that's what the point gentleman was making.
That's exactly right. This is a Cold War relic, this amendment that was put into place. And the gentleman is correct. Since 1992, we've on an annual basis waived its provisions. But we now need to move forward. The world has changed. And as we look to move forward with expanding market access for our farmers, our businesses, especially small and mid-sized firms, it's critical that we grant permanent normalized trade relations if we're going to maintain U.S. competitiveness globally. Right now we're slipping. We're losing our competitive edge. A country like China, for instance, has consummated well over 100 trade agreements just in the last couple of years. We have done 3, and it took us 5 years since the Bush administration to put in place 3 relatively small trade agreements. We need to take advantage of the WTO structure, and with Russia coming on board, it's the 9th largest economy, we have a huge opportunity to promote American competitiveness, American business interests, at no cost to us. Staying out of this hurts us, and that's why we need to move forward. If we don't act to grant PNTR to Russia, our nation's dedicated workforce, our determined business community will be left at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis our foreign competitors. And given the slow growth of our economy and the continued high unemployment rate, we can't allow this to happen. And with Europe struggling, this is an important market to help with global growth, but it's helping global growth by helping U.S. growth, jobs in the United States. It's because of this reality. I was, a co-sponsor of the vital legislation to lift or to grant PNTR to Russia, to place additional reporting requirements, of course, on both Russia and the U.S. administration. These conditions ensure that Russia implements its WTO obligations, and those obligations are enforced. Now, some will raise the question, well, wait a minute, we had a problem with China when they came on to WTO, and we're still struggling with that. We have learned from that process, and we have additional safeguards in this agreement that will help make sure that Russia fully maintains its obligations under permanent normalized trade relations.
I can reclaim my time just to underscore this point. You know, we often forget, I mean, this notion of the WTO, which is an entity that stems from an agreement that the post-war leaders put together in 1947 called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. The idea behind that was to diminish tariff and non-tariff barriers. And when we saw in the early 1990s the WTO put into place, the idea is to see issues like intellectual property violations, which we know are rampant around the world. In Russia, we have intellectual property violations here in the United States as well. We see lots of retaliatory action that is taken. And with the structure of the WTO, there is pressure to live with a rules-based trading system to deal with these kinds of corrupt practices that go on with great regularity. And I'm happy to further yield to my friend.
Right. If we're going to work through these commercial types of agreements and eliminate the corruption, the abuses, intellectual property theft, we have to make the rules-based system work. And the WTO framework, which basically grew out of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade in the 1940s, is that mechanism, and it works. That's what allows us to make a claim against China, for instance, when they're doing abusive practices. It is an equalizer. It basically puts in place a framework that ensures that trade is conducted fair and openly, and that's what U.S. workers, that's what U.S. farmers are looking for. It's also very important as a critical piece to maintaining global security. If we focus on international economics, commercial relationships through open navigation of the seas, open trade, we're going to see less conflict in the world. I think this is critical from a security standpoint. It's critical from a standpoint of economic prosperity for the United States. And as the United States continues to face economic challenges, our national exports have remained relatively strong, probably kept us out of a recession over the last several quarters.
If I could reclaim my time, I think the gentleman makes a very important point about what I like to refer to as the interdependence of economic and political liberalization. Looking at the fact that we know people in this country are hurting. I mean, we all have constituents who are having a difficult time keeping a roof over their head, keeping food on their table. People have lost their jobs and, as I said, their homes, and it's been very, very tough. We know that, again, creating markets for these workers is important. So seeing the standard of living improve throughout the rest of the world creates new markets for us, and it leads to political liberalization, because as we see, the many people in Russia who are suffering have opportunities to improve their quality of life and their standard of living by buying U.S. goods and services. Seems to me that that's going to lead towards greater pressure for political reform to address these human rights problems, to address the crony capitalism that exists, to address the kind of outrageous behavior that we see with great regularity from Vladimir Putin. And I'm happy to further yield to my friend.
Well, I agree with that. And any of these things that will help promote the development of a middle class in these other countries, whether it be China or Russia in this particular case,